Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends. Guys, welcome back to our /ProRevenge, where in today's episode, you'll hear a story that was submitted by a friend of mine who had the pleasure of working with the worst boss ever. Now guys, this episode today is one super long story, so buckle up because it's a crazy ride with a super satisfying ending. I just said super twice. I'm too excited. I hope you enjoy the story today and do hit that subscribe button for future tales. So this story starts many years ago, and it isn't so much revenge as it is sweet, glorious justice and karma. Now, there's a lot of people in the story that come in and out, but there's one main character that the story focuses on. Now, I want to apologize for it being so long, but it's years and years of karma in the making. Let me give you guys some backstory about this main character, who we'll call Tyler, to give you an idea of what a sleazeball he was. Now, Tyler is a 57-year-old man who was at my company who was a manager of sales. Now, he was a little old-fashioned, a little redneck, and overall a piece of trash. He was racist, stubborn, and a huge creep. We've heard him say things like, "Oh, the 20-year-old girls love me because I can keep up with them in bed." Or, "I like to keep it tight like a 10-year-old. He also drives like a complete idiot and thinks it's funny to scare coworkers in the parking lot and swerve towards them while they're walking to the office or when they're sitting in their cars." Now, I also heard at his old job he would steal things and hide them in order to make himself look like a hero for finding them. They caught on and fired him, apparently. He's also the type of person to backstab business partners, try to steal customers from another vendor, or even expose confidential and sensitive material about other employees. Now, I had started a new job at an office with a variety of departments and people. I had my own desk and worked in an office space of a handful of individuals. I worked alongside this one girl, let's call her Barb, who was a little spacey. Now, she wasn't too bright, but she was a nice girl. She was engaged, and I eventually found out that she was engaged to sleazeball Tyler, who was the manager of a different department in the company. Now, I thought it was a little strange, but since they were in different departments, I originally brushed it off. The thing that ended up bothering me was the age gap, and when I found out how they got together. Now, Barb was 24 years old, and he was 57. Tyler was originally Barb's manager. He had hired her, and somehow this guy starts dating the girl and ends his 20-year marriage for her. Somewhere along the line, she moved apartments, he proposed, and she accepted it. By the time I met them, she had been engaged to Tyler for 5 years. The guy was cold, calculating, and a straight-up slimeball. He treats her like crap, and he was an even worse coworker who did minimal work for the generous pay of about $150,000 a year. Now, the funny thing is, they were engaged, but whenever his adult kids would visit him at home, he would force this girl to go find accommodations elsewhere, even though she lived with him. It took a while for her to realize, but eventually Barb concluded that she wasn't engaged. She was just a placeholder. Not once in their 5 years of engagement did they ever talk or even plan a wedding. Eventually, she broke up with him, quit the company, and moved on, but suffered a lot of emotional and trust issues for a very long time. I could see on Facebook that she was always down in the dumps, not sure what to do with herself, and could never seem to move on from him. Now, fast forward maybe a year or so. There were rumors starting at work that one of Tyler's new female hires, who was also in her mid-20s, Jennifer, broke up with her boyfriend and had requested time off to go find a new place to live and to move out of her ex's house. Lo and behold, Tyler heard this and immediately swoops in to the rescue and told her that she could stay with him at his house, rent-free, as long as she needed. Tyler even went to her house to help her move out using his assigned company truck. Now, firstly, that's very inappropriate for a male manager to offer his own place to a direct female subordinate. And secondly, if anything, he could have offered to help pay for a hotel instead and loan her a work truck. Now, it began by her getting a raise, which made her income much higher than her supervisors. And then she got a promotion, and then another promotion, and then we ended up with 2 leads for that department. Now, she's an okay girl, but she was not deserving of that at all because she was not capable nor qualified. She complained a lot, would get lazy, would not pay attention to detail, and when everything hit the fan, she blamed everybody else instead of taking accountability, which is what a lead should do. It got even better as Tyler and Jennifer would have the exact same packed lunches, or they'd both leave the office for lunch separately and come back 3 hours later. Now, long lunches for a manager does make sense, as sometimes they'd have offsite meetings. But for her, it made no sense, as she only had 30-minute lunches. They'd also have the same vacation days to the T, the same start date, the same end date, and sometimes they'd even both come back with a tan. Now, people do gossip in an office, and usually nobody takes notice, but when someone's work is being directly affected by this, people get irate. Cue one of Jennifer's coworkers, Brian, who was also a direct subordinate of Tyler, and Jennifer was his superior. Brian was getting upset at the extra attention and pampering that Jennifer was getting versus him, who did 90% of the work in the department. He would run around all day getting work done, while Jennifer would hang out in Tyler's office all day, or sat at a desk watching YouTube. Brian starts to complain to me, and whoever would listen, that Tyler would show Brian something on his phone, and then a text notification from Jennifer would show up, and the preview text was extremely inappropriate. Brian was partially deaf too, so he would be working and Jennifer would be pretty close to him, and Tyler would walk by and say something particularly nasty to her, thinking that Brian couldn't hear, but oh boy, Brian could hear. Now, why didn't Brian say something to someone higher up than Tyler? Because the higher-ups were in a different building and had a very prejudiced and poor judgment of Brian, all thanks to Tyler's fake stories to build Jennifer up for raises, promotions, and glory. Everyone knew they were dating, but no one had any hard evidence. There was one coworker who did see them together, outside of work, on the streets, and also at the mall, but couldn't catch up to them to take a photo. It was frustrating for all that Jen was doing no work, but getting a lot of credit and causing a lot of grief for other departments. She would get credit for all the ideas and any work that Brian put in, which of course infuriates Brian and disappoints the rest of us. Eventually Brian quit, went to a different manager, Mark, for an exit interview, and he spilled all the beans. So Mark comes to me for validation, and I said I believe it's all true and explained to him the pieces and clues that we all link together, although I've never seen them together nor did I have any real evidence. Now, I did mention the other coworker who saw them together, and Mark went to that person for clarification. It wasn't long after that Mark told me that he'd brought the concern up to the president of the company and promised that there's gonna be an investigation. Truth be told, I was pretty excited about this. I wasn't looking for either of them to be fired or anything, I just wanted a fair workplace environment and to move one of them to a different department. No one was saying they weren't allowed to date, but they had to come forward, acknowledge the relationship, and the proper professional steps had to be taken. To my absolute dismay, I found out that when Tyler was confronted, he denied, and denied, as there was no other evidence, and because he's been with the company for so many years, they dropped the issue. Great, this sleazeball just got away with it. The fact that he's picked up another one of his subordinates again started to make us believe that he wasn't just some perv, but he was a predator. He hired people he thought were attractive, regardless of their skill set or capabilities, and basically got them to do whatever he wanted, and rewarded them with a pay raise. It was disgusting. So everyone kept an eye out and an ear out for hard evidence, but no one could ever find anything. Eventually, I guess their relationship fizzled out, after maybe a year, and they broke up. Jen still kept her position, but now she actually had to do work because Brian was no longer there. On a side note, we found out much later that Jen was also under the impression that all the higher-ups knew about her relationship with Tyler, because that's what Tyler told her. But he also told her that she couldn't tell anybody else, as they would be jealous. But as soon as she broke up with him, he held that situation over her head and basically threatened her and said that if the higher-ups found out that they'd fire her for seducing her manager. What a guy, right? It still baffles me how he tricks these girls to sleep with him. And then comes Darlene, a new hire by Tyler for a remote office in another city that wasn't too far from our office. Now, for the sake of the story, I'll say it's Portland, and not at all uncommon for people to commute back and forth for. Now, she was an okay lady. We talked once in a while, and overall didn't produce a lot of work. About a year and a half after her hiring, she went away for a vacation, and so did Tyler. Then about a month later, she was gone for another week for vacation, and so was Tyler. Someone from an entirely different department, Phoebe, flagged it to me. She said she went up and looked at the company's calendar and saw that these two vacations coincided way too perfectly. The same start date and the same end date. Then other people started to notice things. How Tyler kept barking out loud about his girlfriend from Portland is in town, and how he would go away to see his girlfriend from Portland. Now, it was odd how he never mentioned her name, especially since most people do refer to their boyfriends or girlfriends by name. One of the reasons people started to catch on was that Friday before his second vacation, he talks about his girlfriend from Portland, and it just so happened that Darlene, the new hire, walks into the office and talked about how she was in town to catch a flight to Cancun, right after Tyler was just in the area talking about his trip to Cancun as well. Holy crap. Everybody then realized and put the puzzle pieces together. Tyler had hired himself another freaking girlfriend, but this time she was in her early 40s, but still, she was his direct hire. Now, we all learned from last time, and we didn't bring it forward. We all waited patiently for hard evidence this time. It took months and a lot of patience. No one ever saw him do anything damning together, and nobody ever witnessed any inappropriate texts or emails. They did, however, hear them having screaming arguments over the phone and even in person, where she would storm out of the office calling him demeaning names. It would all end the same way. He would fix things by giving her a raise and she'd be happy again. None of the higher-ups ever witnessed any of this because they were all in different offices and a separate part of the building. The ones who did notice were all part of Tyler's team, and they were scared to say anything due to the fear of losing their jobs. This left Tyler to continue parading around talking about his girlfriend from Portland and how he gets all the young girls, spewing more nasty talk for everybody to hear. The patience really pulled off though, because someone found 2 additional vacations planned for the future that lined up between Tyler and Darlene one after the other, and they reported it to the vice president, showing all 4 vacations in the past 6 months. It turns out another coworker was doing all of Darlene's work because Tyler had directed him to, and Darlene would get all the commission. They also got too comfortable and kept mixing up where they were going for their 4th trip, constantly swapping back and forth between Dominican and Barbados. The vice president ends up confronting Tyler about his relationship with Darlene. Once again, he denies it and laughs it off, saying, "Oh, I see how people would think that, but I can assure you that's not the case." Tyler is then shown how the 4 vacations line up perfectly, and he denies it. He then goes to boast that when he was signed on by the president, that he got special conditions written into his contract that specifically allows him to date his direct subordinates. So even though he wasn't dating Darlene, he was allowed to anyway. Now, the vice president didn't cross-check his contract and took his word for it, that he wasn't dating Darlene, and considered the issue resolved. So word gets around the office of that happening, and we thought, what the hell? Who the heck has that special condition in their work contract that allows them to date their subordinates? Everyone was speechless when it all got out, and he got away with it again, scot-free. There was an immense amount of respect lost for the company, and lost for the executives in particular for not doing anything more than taking his word for it. Great! This guy specifically hires women so he can date them and make other people do her work. Then karma strikes in the form of ProRevenge. So by this time, you're probably wondering, how is there any justice or revenge or karma? This dude is winning. Well, let me tell you. Somehow the universe came full force, and it's just pure domino effect here on out. So about a month after Tyler was confronted the second time, Phoebe was casually talking with her own manager, and Tyler and Darlene came up. Her manager lets it slip that he's known for an absolute fact that Tyler and Darlene are dating, because he's personal friends of both. So Phoebe takes this information to the vice president, and the vice president then approaches her manager for evidence and information. Manager admits that he knows, and even goes to show photo evidence of them together at events and outings. They then cross-check his contract with the company, and surprise, surprise, there was nothing in the contract that stated that he can date his direct subordinates. Immediately, the vice president confronts Tyler and orders that Darlene is moved departments, and is also given a demotion as she was not meeting expectations of her position. Tyler is forced to comply as his relationship with her was a direct conflict of interest, as he controlled her salary and her employee reviews. They couldn't hide anything anymore. Darlene is shocked with the direction to move her. She was under the assumption that Tyler had a lot of control over the company and that he owned majority shares and was untouchable. She just couldn't understand why Tyler could not cancel the department transfer and let her keep her fluffy title. Now, he couldn't cancel the transfer, of course, because in reality, he didn't own anything. He basically lied to her that he had all this power so she'd sleep with him. And of course, Darlene unleashed hell. Now, this was a clever woman who, over the course of their relationship, documented a lot of things. She goes to the president and showed him all the emails and texts about how Tyler told her that he had a special clause in his contract, how he promised her all these promotions and raises if she didn't say anything. She had twisted it hard on Tyler, turning herself victim and him into some earth-walking demon from the deepest pits of hell. Darlene felt betrayed and used by Tyler and just straight up ruined him. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. It all came to light. He was exposed. They found out that he lied to everybody and tried to manipulate and gaslight Darlene to act a certain way. And then the other women from work, including Jen, came forward and showed explicit texts that he'd send with disgusting pictures of his privates and threats of getting them fired if they said anything. Now, I was always surprised that they never came forward first, but when their job is on the line and that's all they know, some people just cower and hide for fear of losing their jobs. Even some men in the company came forward and brought up all the unacceptable talk that Tyler would say in the workplace, about how little girls and women at work would wet their panties when he got near them. With that, Tyler was immediately dismissed with cause, and from what I hear, he's also slapped with harassment and assault charges. He lost his $150,000 annual salary job, was put on a sex offenders list, and eventually lost his giant home. Now, what was the cherry on top was that it turns out that he had a side business with Darlene, and he would send her out of town to work on that business on the main company's dime. The crazy thing is that she was told that the company knew about their relationship and their business. And it doesn't end there. He was so upset about being given the short end of the stick that he tried to sue the company and held his company-issued truck practically ransom by parking it at his lawyer's office. In the end, he lost that as police and a tow truck was sent to that lawyer's office to retrieve company property. It turns out that he had no savings, no retirement plan, because he blew all his money he earned from work to impress women. Tyler ended up getting everything he deserved, which was nothing. He had to move cities to live with one of his kids to get by, and nobody ever heard from him again. The best kind of justice, in my opinion, is karma. My friends, what an absolute roller coaster ride. Now, I love hearing stories about terrible bosses getting what they deserve, and I've read a lot of revenge stories, but this guy has gotta be one of the worst bosses ever out there. Like, the guy basically used his position of power to essentially prey on vulnerable women, and he definitely deserves what he got, which was nothing. Absolutely nothing. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /ProRevenge. Guys, thank you so much for coming to listen to this wonderful story. And if you guys have story submissions, my email is in the description box below. And if you missed the last episode I did on the channel, I'll link it right here. A Karen pepper sprays a paramedic, two paramedics actually, for cutting her off in traffic. They were responding to an emergency. They had their lights on and everything. If you guys missed it, go check it out, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I love you.